Well, hello everyone, and welcome to our webinar today on Operator Connect. My name is Lance McCall, the campaign manager here for Ribbon, and I'm joined today by Patrick Watson, the senior analyst at Cavell Group. You see him on your screen there in the upper right, as well as Greg Zweig, director of solutions marketing here for Ribbon. So thanks to each of them for joining us. Before we get started today, I did want to point out the Ask a Question box. It's at the bottom right of your screen. If you don't see that, you may see a comment box or a question mark icon. You can click that and you'll see the questions area pop open to your right. So please take advantage of that. We'd love to hear from you throughout the webinar today and get your questions answered for you. In addition, we do have one piece of collateral for you to take at your convenience. You'll see that as well on the right side by clicking the little document icon on the right side of your screen, and take that at any time throughout the presentation today. That's everything I have. I will be back towards the end to do a little Q&A session with Patrick and Greg. But for now, I'm going to go ahead and turn things over to Patrick, who's going to kick everything off for us. Patrick, take it away.
Thanks, Lance, and thanks to Ribbon for having me on the webinar today. So 17 million, it's a pretty big number. Just for some context, that's roughly equivalent to the entire population of the Netherlands. And that's what my company, Cavell Group, forecasts that the Operator Connect market will grow to cover over the next few years. So that's providing a pretty huge opportunity for the communications industry. So that's just part of the topic that we'll be discussing today, which is one of the ones that we get most interest from a Cavell Group perspective. And that is Microsoft Teams and telephony enablement. So as Lance said, my name is Patrick Watson. I'm a senior analyst at Cavell Group. For those of you who don't know Cavell Group, I'll introduce you to what we do in a couple of minutes. But on the next slide, before I go into more detail in terms of the market opportunity and the numbers, I just wanted to take you through some of the key takeaways from my portion of the presentation today. So first of all, I'll look at Microsoft Teams in general, the pretty extraordinary growth that it's experienced over the past 24 months or so. We'll look at the telephony opportunity and how that relates to business sizes and vertical markets. And I'll look specifically at Operator Connect and cover why we believe it's going to become the most popular telephony enablement option as opposed to either Microsoft calling plans or direct routing. At the moment, telephony enablement in Teams is still pretty low. It's less than 5% of the overall user base. And I'll explain a bit about why that might be and how we expect it to grow in the future. We'll also look at the different range of Teams telephony enablement options, and I'll compare those in terms of sort of positives and negatives from a service provider or telco perspective. So for those of you who aren't familiar with Cavell Group, on the next slide, I just give a very brief introduction to us. We are effectively an independent research and consultancy firm, working for more than 15 years in the communications, collaboration, and contact center industries. And every year we carry out various research studies with technology vendors, service providers, and telcos. And we also conduct enterprise-focused research where we talk directly to businesses about their use of technology. And we survey hundreds of service providers and telcos every year, and we spoke directly to over 2,000 end user businesses across North America, the UK, and mainland Europe. And throughout this presentation, I'll take you through some of our research findings and what that we think that means for the industry. So on the next slide, I'll start with some of our enterprise research. So that showed that over 90% of large organizations, and we class that as any organization with more than 250 seats, 90% of those have already adopted a cloud-based collaboration application, and 88% of them already use Microsoft Teams specifically. So demand for the consolidated platforms offering video, audio conferencing, messaging, and collaborative features has dramatically increased over the past few years, partly caused by the pandemic and that rising demand for remote working. So you could see the growth in Teams. It was Microsoft's fastest growing business application of all time. That was actually pre-pandemic, and the numbers have gone pretty crazy. There's over 270 million monthly active users on the platform. And I think this growth, as you can see here, clearly shows how popular the application is. And there's probably a few key reasons behind that. Teams is included within the majority of Office 365 bundles, alongside all of those familiar applications like Word, PowerPoint, and Excel. And so it offers that familiar user experience and management experience for businesses and end users alike. So one feature that Teams doesn't include as standard is telephony. And as you will all know, that has to be enabled via an add-on service. And so that is via one of three routes. And on the next slide, I'll just dive into telephony in a bit more detail. So you've got those three routes for enabling telephony. You can use Microsoft calling plans, there's direct routing, or now there's Operator Connect. And as I said on the opening slide, currently the proportion of the overall Microsoft Teams user base that have telephony capability enabled is actually quite low. It's less than 5% of the overall monthly active user base. That's around 10 million users globally, although it's growing pretty substantially all of the time. The vast majority of those telephony-enabled users are deployed at the moment via direct routing. That's because Operator Connect is effectively quite a new offering in the space, and calling plans effectively account for less than 9% of the telephony-enabled users at the moment. So on the next slide, let's have a look at some of those businesses that do enable Microsoft Teams telephony already. And this graph on screen is from our enterprise focus research, where, as I said, we spoke to more than 2,000 businesses across North America and Western Europe. And this graph on screen shows that the adoption of Microsoft Teams telephony increases in accordance with business size. So as you can see, in a business of 1 to 9 users, the proportion that use telephony within Teams is around 16%, but in enterprises of over 250 users, it's more than 70%. So effectively, the opportunity relating to Teams telephony increases in larger businesses. On the next slide, I look a bit more at vertical markets as opposed to business sizes. And I wanted to try and identify what vertical markets might provide the biggest opportunities for Teams telephony. And as you can see on screen here, we've listed the different vertical markets in terms of whether they use Teams telephony now, whether they plan to use it, or whether they don't use it. And I've sorted it from left to right in terms of the yellow columns, which relate to the plan to use category. And you can see there that utilities, hospitality, and the public sector have some of the biggest planned adoption rates when it comes to Teams telephony. So these could potentially provide substantial opportunities and a viable market in the future for those telcos and service providers that offer Teams telephony enablement solutions. So as I said previously, there are three options for enabling telephony in Microsoft Teams: calling plans, direct routing through third parties, and now Operator Connect. And I wanted to utilize some of the knowledge that we've gained from speaking to hundreds of service providers and telcos every year in terms of the positives and negatives and considerations that are associated with these different enablement options. So firstly, if we take a look at Microsoft calling plans, they're a really easy option to resell and manage if you're a Microsoft partner. And they offer a straightforward option for end user businesses looking to deploy telephony in Teams. From a service provider perspective, though, you obviously do have to be a Microsoft partner. There's potentially a limited margin opportunity. Obviously, it's an incredibly competitive market when it comes to Microsoft licensing. And you may encounter some real world issues in terms of enabling legacy devices and systems. If you look at fax machines, lift lines, and there are potentially also slight limitations around sort of supplementary services and revenue streams for service providers and telcos. Currently, as I said, by far the most popular option for Teams telephony enablement is via direct routing. And that's because it's open to all service providers who utilize Microsoft certified SBCs. They're able to integrate with their existing networks, OSS, BSS systems, and existing PBX solutions. And direct routing provides lots of potential areas for supplementary revenue streams. However, in terms of potential considerations, you would have to use Microsoft certified SBCs, as obviously Ribbon are certified in the session border controller world in Microsoft land. It's an increasingly competitive market. Over the last few years, we've seen hundreds of service providers and telcos move to offer direct routing services. Direct routing does require some technical knowledge and the infrastructure around session border controllers. And it would also require some knowledge in terms of PowerShell, that's Microsoft's programming language, for the configuration and management of the infrastructure. Finally, let's move on to Operator Connect. So this is the latest route that you can look at to deploy telephony within Microsoft Teams. And I think Microsoft has witnessed pretty extraordinary demand to join the Operator Connect program from service providers and telcos. And I think that's part of the reason behind the launch of Operator Connect Accelerator, which I'm sure Greg will go on to, is a program that is going to allow select and approved Microsoft partners to provide software and services to help telecom operators and service providers to accelerate their onboarding into Operator Connect and also provide ongoing support and assistance. The demand to join the Operator Connect program is so huge because it provides access to this growing telephony market. And that market is enabled directly from within Teams itself. End user businesses can use the Teams admin center to deploy telephony services to their users. And as I cited, that 17 million user figure at the start of the program, Operator Connect effectively is going to give providers access to that huge burgeoning market. There are a few potential considerations with Operator Connect that service providers and telcos would need to consider. Currently, the application to join the program can be quite lengthy. You do have to enter a contractual agreement with Microsoft, and there are some pretty rigorous network and infrastructure requirements across the connectivity and Azure. But all of that is for very good reason, and that's so that Microsoft can ensure that the quality of service within Teams is of a great level for end users and businesses. So all of that structure in place is to ensure that the solution is class leading in terms of telephony. And I think finally around Operator Connect, you would require some technical knowledge around the Microsoft APIs, and any partner looking to join the program would probably need some development capability in-house to automate the processes on the back end and maybe integrate into existing OSS BSS systems. So on the next slide, I think if we bear in mind the comparison of those different telephony options for telcos and service providers, I think it's really interesting that the demand we're seeing for Operator Connect in terms of providers wanting to join the program is so huge. And the graph on the right of this slide is from a study that we conducted with service providers globally. And it showed that more than 40% of the service providers that we spoke to are interested in joining the Operator Connect program. Currently, there are more than 20 providers globally on the list. Microsoft are adding to that all the time. And I think there's a really substantial demand. There's a lot of providers who are currently in the application process. And Microsoft are experiencing this high demand in terms of applicants to the program because of the potential size of the market opportunity. And effectively, no one wants to miss out on the potential opportunity. So why is there so much demand to be part of the Operator Connect program? On the next slide, I think I go into this in a bit more detail with our forecast that I talked about at the beginning of the slide. First of all, the obvious one is the Teams telephony market is so substantial. So if you look at direct routing, Operator Connect and calling plans, there are tens of millions of users that are going to be deployed over the next few years to use telephony in Microsoft Teams. This is going to be a huge part of the market, and I'll potentially talk about the proportion of that. The graph on screen shows our forecast for Teams telephony enablement, and this is just across North America and Western Europe. At the moment, there are around 6.5 million telephony-enabled users across those geographies, but we expect that to rise significantly over the next 5 years. And we also believe that Operator Connect will become the most popular telephony enablement route. As I said on the first slide, by the end of 2026, our forecast shows, and that's that red column on the right, that Operator Connect will cover more than 17 million users just across North America and Western Europe. So I think that goes to demonstrate just how large the potential opportunity is for telcos and service providers, and why there's so much interest and demand in relation to the Operator Connect program. That's pretty much it from me for now. And I want to hand over to Greg to talk about more about the Accelerator program and hear about what Ribbon are doing in the space. So, Greg, over to you.
Thanks, Patrick. And I think we'll have to get you a better slide flipper for the next event. As I think you summed it up well, service providers need to pay attention to Operator Connect because it will drive their business over the next 4 years. You simply can't afford to ignore it. As American bank robber Willie Sutton put it, that's where the money is. And I think if you step back and you look at Operator Connect, to some extent, I don't think Microsoft has been given enough credit for what they're trying to do with Operator Connect. Fundamentally, it's an attempt to dramatically simplify the acquisition process, right? To make it easy to buy telecom services the way you would, use Google Play Store or the iTunes App Store. Let's face it, today you can buy a car or even a house, right? You can buy an entire house on the internet. But for some reason, when you go in the telecom realm, most of that is still a manual process. Now, I recognize that for many providers, the idea of trying to put their services into a box this big on the screen concerns them from a commoditization perspective. But I think the reality is that they have to recognize that even if they don't want this model, eventually it's how the process is going to work, and we all need to get there. The other thing that I think confused folks early on is that they sort of assumed when they first started looking at the Operator Connect program that this was a logo swap program. That's what I would call it, which is, you pay some money to Microsoft, you fill out a form, and you end up on this page. But in reality, that's not the case. Microsoft really envisioned here a very structured program, right? And so even today, you have to, request admission to the program, as Patrick sort of mentioned, and actually sign a complete contract with Microsoft. I think, as a tech company, Microsoft envisioned that they were going to be able to deliver this really incredibly rich set of APIs and deliver robust QoS. They have a requirement for what they call MAPS, which is the Microsoft Azure peering service. They thought we're going to build this really differentiated offer, and it's all going to be cloud to cloud. There's no SIP trunks to the premises, no telecom services to the premises. So I think it was a very ambitious program, and not surprising when you think of Microsoft as a company. It's full of young and talented developers. These are the kind of folks who really understand how to build a rich tool set and leverage things like REST APIs. But I think the challenge here is I'm not sure that they fully appreciated your challenges, the carrier's challenges, right? We know as Ribbon that you have multiple back office systems. A lot of it grows through M&A. You have multiple legacy systems in the back office. I make the joke that, a lot of those systems are so old they should be put to rest. They don't know how to deploy with REST APIs. These are things that were literally designed in the 80s and 90s. And now somebody at Microsoft is asking you, hey, just bolt a REST API onto that. That shouldn't be a problem. And then, of course, the other piece of the equation, which is most providers don't necessarily have the kind of IT skill sets, or if they do, the number of people they need to keep these kind of large projects going for a long time. So I think inadvertently, Microsoft created too many barriers to entry for providers for Operator Connect. And I think a lot of the reason that we're here today is because of those barriers. And, Patrick mentioned the fact that there's 20 some service providers that have joined the program. If you look, I think it's an impressive set of providers who've joined, but at the same time, it's also relatively geographically limited. There's no providers from Central America, South America. There's no providers from Africa. So you recognize there's a lot of opportunity here for growth. And so today, I think some of the challenges that providers face is that they they have to sign this formal contract. And that's not going to change, but it is a challenge because they're like anything else that goes through that legal process. They need what's called a MAPS connection, as I mentioned, which is kind of a fat pipe to each Azure data center they're going to serve. And of course, there's the entire development effort. There's the people, the money, the time. And because of that, it makes the timelines to get started long. So in other words, even if you say, hey, I'm interested, the time between when you express that interest and you actually get into market can be quite a long period of time. You see an example here on the screen here where one of the early adopters, they talked about the fact that it took them 9 months, and that was using basically 3 man-years of effort. So what that means is that, if you don't start until today and you take that same kind of effort, you're a long time getting into market. And then last but not least, think about Microsoft as a company. They don't sit still. So this is not going to be, Operator Connect's not done. It might be in market, but they're the kind of company that keeps moving forward. So as a provider, you're going to have an ongoing effort to maintain and manage the solution and continue, the development team. They're not going to be able to go back to the last project they did on 2-factor development or whatever. There's going to be people on Operator Connect indefinitely. And, I think we all have to appreciate the fact that this is not just a conversation about how to make phone calls. That's also, I think, a challenge that I hear over and over is, a lot of times providers look only in the context of the phone call part of the equation. This is really a conversation around digital workflow. And that's what business customers want. I think today, if you look, most of the carriers, and I think, Patrick, you would probably chime in here and say the same, most of the carriers that have deployed Operator Connect are still using a simple contact us form, right? When you leave that Operator Connect, they call it the Teams Admin Center. When you leave the Teams Admin Center, you basically go back to kind of a traditional contact center on the service provider side. So I think if you add it all up, Operator Connect has this amazing potential to be a game changer, but it has some aspects that are holding it back. With that in mind, I think Microsoft recognized those gaps. They recognized that, they had 20 incredible service providers, or 22 that had joined, but that there were still gaps. And so that's why they created something called Operator Connect Accelerator, which they announced in the middle of April. And basically, Microsoft reached out to a select group of technology partners in their ecosystem and created basically an integration layer between Operator Connect and the service providers. And they refer to that integration layer now as Operator Connect Accelerator. So from a Ribbon perspective, we used our 15 plus years of Microsoft experience, and we got engaged in Operator Connect to build a program we call Ribbon Connect for Operator Connect. At the top of this, if you look at it sort of like a layer cake, is a set of portals that we've created for the solution. So there's a service provider portal, a channel portal, so if you have a multi-level reseller engagement model, and of course, an end user portal. I think the portals are critical because ultimately they reduce the cost and complexity of deployments, right? They can support both the craft people inside a service provider as well as the end user themselves. And they also serve as a sort of bridge. So if you look over on the left-hand side of the diagram, you see this OSS integration. Well, a big challenge for providers when they initially looked at Operator Connect is there's a lot of depth to the amount of integration that you have to have in order to give a rich experience. So what we've done with Ribbon Connect is basically created this portal layer at the top that allows you to essentially provide a smooth look and feel to your customers, whether or not you have the entire OSS integration done or not. You can just have a few items done and actually still provide that rich experience to the customer. If you have to, say, import a billing CSV file at the end of the month to sort of overcome something, you can do that, but customers will never see that on the portal side of the equation. Now, below that is this engagement and automation layer. I'm going to touch on that in the next slide in a little bit more detail. And below that is the SBC and network management layer. This is basically where we manage the Maps connection. So we can provide we'll provide a common Maps connection into Teams, and then make it easy for a provider just to be able to connect to us with a standard SIP trunk. They don't necessarily have to manage the whole Maps experience. And of course, we'll also provide options for SBC services. You can either get a shared solution or dedicated. So now let's turn and talk a little bit more about this automation and engagement layer. We think this is really critical to this new Operator Connect offering, critical to deliver a compelling customer journey. As I said, I think the portals are important, but I think there ultimately has to be an automated sales and automated deployment workflow. Why? I think first, because it's what customers expect, right? If you, again, kind of use that Amazon or online purchase model, right? We all expect we'll go up, we'll select what we want, and then we'll get updates about when it's shipping. Now, obviously, in the case of Operator Connect, it's a little bit more complicated than that, but the idea is the same, right? Which is that you want to be able to give customers information, you want them to provide you back details, and then you want to leverage that information for the entire sales flow. It's also important because I think it's critical to cost. If you want to reduce the cost to serve, particularly in something like the SMB space, then you have to automate that scenario. You simply can't have the same sales organization supporting your medium business and large business and having them call on these small customers with 5 or 10 seats of solution, right? And so I think the automation piece is really critical to changing the cost structure of these kind of offers. And we know in the past that many providers have struggled with these cost structures, not just for Operator Connect, but for Microsoft Direct Routing and even SIP trunking in general, right? So, at the end of the day, I think the Operator Connect has to be automated and deliver self-service whenever possible. So, as I said, Microsoft has blazed this path for new ways to integrate telecom services. And we're certain that they're the very first, but we also recognize that many other cloud and contact center providers will follow suit. And because of that, Ribbon is ready. We're also working on solutions for other leading providers, right? We know that you as service providers need a solution that's not wedded to any vendor or any cloud. So today's session is absolutely focused on Microsoft, but we recognize that providers need a common solution, right? You need to be able to plug in once to one environment and deliver multiple UCaaS or contact center as a service programs, right? It allows you then to use a common set of tools, both for your craft folks inside the business as well as customers, and provide a common type of sales automation, right? That makes it easier for your employees to deliver consistently, and it also makes it easier for customers to manage and adopt, because it's very clear, and I'm sure that many of the people on the call have run into this, there are absolutely customers who are, as much as it might seem kind of orthogonal, who are going to say, well, I have some Teams deployment, some Zoom deployment, some WebEx deployment, either because of geography or because of department level preferences or merger and acquisition. And they want a service provider to be able to provide SIP trunking or dial tone to each of those, and they want those to be integrated solutions. For service providers, ultimately, to be effective and efficient, they have to have a way to be able to manage all of these in a single model. They can't be telling customers either I can't do it, or it works this way when you use Zoom and this way when you use Teams. That's not going to be a winning model. Now, I recognize as well that there are people watching thinking, hey, this sounds good, But ultimately, I think I have to build this myself as a provider. It's not going to be cost effective to buy. I think you really have to think carefully about whether that's the case. The reality is, for most providers, based on what we've seen, is they're looking at a 9 to 18 month development cycle to get in market, right? That's something that reflects anywhere, and I'll use US dollars. I know we have an international audience, but for the American here, I got to keep it simple. Between $500,000 and $2 million in US dollars in spend, I think is a reasonable number here. Think about not just the spend, but think about, do I have the resources available to get this started? And then, how long is it going to take me to get into market? How much revenue have I lost since I wasn't in market? So what's the gap there? But also keep in mind, if I lose key customers during that period, I lose all of that revenue in perpetuity. So it's not just the gap revenue that you're dealing with here, it's the opportunity cost over a long period of time, right? And then you have to also keep in mind the fact that there's a significant ongoing cost for this. It doesn't just, as I mentioned, it doesn't just go away. And there's things like certification. It's not, you should expect that you're required as part of the Operator Connect build out to have third-party certification. That could easily run you $50,000 US. So as you look at the comparison between building this yourself and something like Ribbon Connect, where we can get you on board in a matter of weeks, there's a major difference here in terms of the speed to market, the richness of the solution, not just today, but what will that solution be evolved to in 2 or 3 years, because it's going to have constant investment, right? So it's a very different sort of comparison than you might expect. And of course, from a Ribbon perspective, we think we have a strategic advantage over our competitors in this space because we've created solutions for carriers for decades. We live the reality of this business. When you think about it, when you look at the architecture, you realize this solution, when you deploy it, any Operator Connect accelerator is in the call path. So the quality of the solution, reflects on the quality of your brand, right? It needs 24/7, 365 global support. It needs to be built using carrier class solutions, right? And it needs to be available globally. So, I started the session with a quote from an American bank robber. I'll end it with a quote from a British Robert Baron. It might be a little crass, but I think it drives home a point that really success starts with a decision to act. As Patrick showed, this market is moving, and we think that only providers that act will have an opportunity to win. With that, I'm gonna throw it back to Lance and see if we have a few questions. And then also, Lance, I know we want people to hang on for a second or two because I think we're gonna have a survey at the end of the session.
That's correct. Thanks, Greg. Yeah, we do have a few questions that have come in, so thank you for sending those in. And by the way, as we're going through some of these and answering them, if you have another question, feel free to ask that as well. But and yes, when we do end today, when the webinar is over, there will be a quick 2-question survey that just pops up. So we'd appreciate your participation with that survey. But let's get to some questions here. So Patrick, you had mentioned kind of at the very beginning of the presentation about the 17 million users and that's the expected growth. How does that compare to the rest of the UC market?
Well, Lance, I'll actually tie that into another of the questions as well, because Joe asked, to what extent do you expect that Operator Connect will hurt the PBX business of service providers? So I think this is twofold. So the 17 million is obviously, that's a Cavell forecast, and we've approximated that by we speak to telcos and service providers, we get their numbers, we speak to a lot of the providers on the Operator Connect program, we speak to SBC vendors and enablers such as Ribbon to gauge an understanding of numbers. But obviously forecasting 5 years out, there's a lot of variables in there. So that's what we've got at the moment. Effectively, At the moment, if we look at North America, Microsoft represent about 10% of what we'd refer to as the cloud PBX market. So not the overall PBX market, just the cloud-enabled users. If the forecast goes as we expect it to, as to that 17 million, Microsoft would grow its share significantly to more than a quarter of the market, and it would be effectively the largest cloud PBX player globally. In terms of just tying that into Jerk's question, what extent do you expect that Operator Connect to hurt the PBX business of service providers? It's sort of twofold, because effectively we see the overall available market in terms of telephony-enabled users, both cloud and on-premise, actually decreasing over time slightly. And this is because of effectively collaboration solutions like Teams, Slack, WebEx Teams, a lot more. What would have been traditional PSTN calls are actually going to be on net. There'll be video conferences, there'll be audio conferences, and over time, that total market will slightly decrease. However, I would say that the opportunity in terms of cloud PBX solutions is going to increase massively over the next 5 years. So when you say it might hurt service providers, I don't actually see that. I think the market's going to grow so much in terms of cloud PBX solutions that there's enough, the pie is big enough for everyone to have a significant piece, even if Microsoft increases its market share from 10% currently of the cloud PBX market to more like a quarter, because that market is going to grow itself, that effectively there's going to be enough pieces of the pie for everyone from a cloud communication sense anyway. I do see it potentially maybe hurting on-premise PBX systems as that market is gradually, as we all know, is going to shift to cloud more and more.
Okay, very good. So obviously a lot of opportunity there to take advantage of. A couple other questions that came along. These are two different questions, but they're sort of the same. I have existing SBCs in my network. Can I reuse those with Operator Connect?
Yeah, we get that question a lot, Lance. And the answer is it does depend a bit. Microsoft has put some specific requirements around how Operator Connect works. Generally speaking, because this is an as-a-service model, in other words, it's integrated and we have to have administrative control, the biggest challenge probably for service providers is providing a third party like ourselves access to their network and administrative access to a piece of equipment that they own. I think pragmatically speaking, you're going to see that most providers either use the shared SBC we offer, or they choose to use a dedicated set of SBCs that are probably deployed in the cloud somewhere. And Lance, I saw Mohammed asked a question, sort of, can we provide more technical details on Operator Connect? This webinar is really not for that level of detail, but I would say, one, we'd be happy to reach out to you and spend a significant amount of time talking about how Operator Connect works. The other thing to appreciate is, and this comes up a lot as a question, is people say, well, can you give us the APIs? And the answer to that is we can't. The way Microsoft has set up the Operator Connect program, if you want access to that level of detail, the first thing you have to do is to request participation in the program and then to sign the contract with Microsoft. At that point, you'll have access to the full set of APIs. Even as an Operator Connect Accelerator partner, we're not legally able to give you that information until you make that first step and engage with Microsoft. And, Patrick, I did see a question that came in, you may have caught it, about forecasting for the African market. I don't know go ahead.
Yeah, so currently no, and that ties into what you said before, Greg. In terms of the geographic coverage of operators within the Operator Connect program, as Greg was saying, we aren't seeing full global coverage. So effectively, until we know what operators are going to be covering that market, it's very difficult to forecast in it. We do have some, as I said, the the majority, around 60-70% of telephony-enabled users are in North America and Western Europe, with the remainder across the rest of the world, Oceania, Asia, Africa, South America. But at the moment, we don't have any detailed forecasting for Africa specifically. However, that is something that Cavell Group, we're in the process of doing. So we're looking at all of these geographic markets. Traditionally, our expertise has been in North America and in Western Europe, but we've already looked into some of the oceanic markets, and we are exploring new markets. I was discussing Nigeria the other day. So hopefully in the future, I can provide a bit more detail in terms of forecasting the African market.
Yeah, and there was another question here around adoption. I think both of us should probably answer this in terms of, the adoption of Operator Connect in large, and as you showed, right, primarily large enterprise today. Yeah. And I think the real question is, what about the SMB market, and where do you see that?
Yeah, so I saw that question. I was having a think about it. So again, I think the sort of answer is twofold. So the enablement of teams has definitely been in larger businesses, but that also correlates to the adoption of collaboration solutions in general. Even if you put telephony aside for a minute, collaboration solutions have generally been adopted much more by larger businesses. And if you think of the requirement of a small business, and I know I'm generalizing slightly, there might be a few users who potentially are in a central location. There's less demand for collaboration solutions when compared to a much larger business with global sites and the demand for that asynchronous communication. So that's the first factor. First of all, collaboration in general has been adopted less in SMB. And then I think, and Greg, I'd be interested to hear your opinion on this as well, that there have been some potential technical barriers to smaller businesses. Although direct routing and direct routing as a service solutions have become much more widely available, I think initially small businesses were less likely to have the technical expertise to implement those compared to larger enterprises and larger businesses. But when it comes to, and sort of the final part of that question is, where do we see the growth of the adoption in SMB? We do forecast that adoption will grow. And one of the things we've heard sort of anecdotally and qualitatively initially from providers on the Operator Connect program is there has been a lot of interest from small businesses who want that ease of deployment. And as Greg was saying, in a perfect world, you'll be a Teams admin user, you'll go to the Teams admin center, and you can easily deploy telephony services via Operator Connect. So I think that will really appeal to small businesses. So you will see Operator Connect massively encouraging businesses of smaller sizes to adopt Teams telephony. Although the question that Alex mentions over the top services, it will be a combination of that. The one thing I'd be slightly wary of with the over the top UC, Seat and Teams integration is that license stacking problem that you get where you're paying for effectively Microsoft licenses to enable telephony, and then you're stacking another cloud PBX as a service seat on top, and which maybe small businesses might be more wary of. So, but I would expect Operator Connect to accelerate that adoption in small business. I don't know if you'd agree with that, Greg.
Yeah, I think it's kind of a complex question. You mentioned, I'll start maybe from the back. I think you mentioned that stacking, and what, just for the sort of back up there, the question came in from the gentleman on the screen was really around the fact, can I, will it be over the top providers or could I guess another example we get a lot is, what about using the BroadSoft in combination, say, with Teams? And what we've seen is kind of interesting, which is we have had a fair number of customers who've actually adopted both today, and I think that's because in the short term they're looking for a way to transition from a different platform over to Teams, and so they look at this and say, well, the money part's the easy part, getting people to change is the hard part. So for a period of time, I think they're willing to pay the stack, but I don't think that'll go on forever is the answer. And kind of specific to SMB, I think if Microsoft wants to succeed in this market, they ultimately have to deliver an SMB offer because, there's so many opportunities. If you look at the traditional PBX market, it's really, it's kind of bifurcated. So there's, if you the total number of users at the large end and the total number of users in SMB are actually very similar. The difference is the SMBs are broken up into lots of small accounts. And so I think it kind of goes back to what I talked about earlier, which is that if you're going to make Operator Connect work for service providers, they have to get the cost to serve down. It has to be 90% probably automated. It can't be the 55 steps. And you hit the nail on the head. One of the challenges that direct routing has faced is it is somewhat complex because you do have to have multiple players involved, right? You have to have somebody who knows how to set up teams. You have to know how to use PowerShell. You have to get the SBC set up, or the provider has to do that. There's a lot of steps. And if you're the small, accountant's office out there, you're thinking to yourself, wow, this is a lot of work. I used to just call the local Avaya or Mitel reseller. He or she showed up, did it, and went away. And I think ultimately that's where Operator Connect has to get to. And in theory, it should be easier because, 270 million of us already have Teams loaded up on our desktop. So why should it be so complicated to add a 10-digit number onto the top of that?
Yeah, I completely agree. And that migration point you mentioned at first is absolutely critical.
Yeah, and I answered a question earlier. I see it came in after. I'm not sure if it came in after I answered this, but somebody asked the question. Do you need to go through the Operator Connect submitting process if you choose the something like our Ribbon Connect solution? And the answer is you do still need to go through that program. However, one difference, and I sort of touched on it, but not clearly, is that we can provide as the certification process. So with a typical Operator Connect deployment, you would have to do your own certification if you did your own integration work. If you use a solution like ours, we can certify you and sort of absolve you of that requirement. And I'm just trying to look through here. We've had a couple more questions come in since that question. So bear with me, folks, as I take a look.
Well, while you're doing that, Greg, a lot of questions about adoption and the interest in where Operator Connect is going. So I did put a little link in the chat there about, if you want to learn more about that, Greg wrote a blog about this Operator Connect. So you can take a look at that, perhaps get a few more of the insights there. I had one while you're looking through the list. Does Microsoft support local survivability or SBAs?
Yeah, that's a good question too, Lance. I saw that at the top. Today, a big question that comes up is around things like analog adapters, local survivability. We get a lot of questions about our edge devices that we make. And the answer right now is you have to remember that Operator Connect is a cloud-to-cloud offer. So there's no concept of dial tone in the premises. Now, you can mix and match in the sense that you could deliver 80 or 90, I don't know, pick a percentage, 80 or 90% of the trunks via Operator Connect and use direct routing, say, for fax machines or elevator phones and things like that. But there's no built-in asset right now inside of the Operator Connect environment to provide those solutions. So there are certainly large businesses out there because they have a large number of deployed PBXs or they require survivable branch appliances where they're going to continue to use direct routing. I think, over time, we'll see Operator Connect change and adopt and add these services, but they're not there today. And I also saw as we were going through, I saw another really interesting question, Patrick. I'll be curious to get again, this is also Mohammed who asked this question. He sort of said, hey, do you think that Microsoft, or I guess he described it as Operator Connect, will set the price for telecom services and try and kill the competition?
I think that is a really interesting point, because one of the things that we've heard most from service providers and telcos is this question of differentiation within Operator Connect. So I don't see that happening, because Microsoft is very keen to leverage the experience and the expertise of the telecoms industry to enable telephony within Teams. So effectively, as I said, they're putting various things in place through Operator Connect to ensure that the quality of service for Teams is maintained and the great experience for users is maintained. But then effectively, once everything is seamlessly integrated and automated on the back end, you have a sort of open market with those certified suppliers. So I don't necessarily see that. I think the differentiation point for telcos and service providers on the program is going to be key. And Greg, I think it comes back to what you said before. It's going to be that user management experience is going to be a key differentiator. How easy is it going to be to deploy? As you said, if you go on through the Teams admin center, if you can't seamlessly pick a provider and then they're saying, oh, we'll call you back, you're probably going to go with the one that makes it most easy and straightforward for you. So I think price is going to be a factor, but I think there's going to be other key areas that are going to be important as differentiators for anyone who joins the Operator Connect program.
Yeah, I agree with you. I think that Microsoft, there's always been this fear, and it probably comes from the original Microsoft calling plans, where Microsoft, I think, initially thought maybe they should become a service provider. I think the reality is actually the other way around. I think they've recognized they don't want to take that business. They learned how hard all your jobs are. I think that's the real answer. And so as a result of that, I think they want to be the enabler and not the provider. And I don't think they'll get in the middle of the pricing model. But I do agree with you, Patrick. I think that providers do have to be attentive to the fact they don't want it to become, they don't want this Teams Admin Center to become the, $20.99, $15.99, $9.99, decision point. And keep in mind, this is the beginning of the Operator Connect model. One of the things that we're already looking at, for instance, is, how do we do things like we have a very sophisticated analytics solution that we've created that integrates with Teams. We're looking at, hey, how can we take a solution like that and make that easy to productize in the Operator Connect environment? So that can be an add-on service, right? So providers can create, add-ons that change the value, particularly, I think, when you're talking about large multi-site, multinational enterprises. There's no way that those buyers aren't going to be interested in value-added solutions, and they're going to be interested in someone's brand equity when they make a decision. They're not going to just buy on price.
Yeah,
so,
agree.
I think there's a lot there. Well, Lance, I realize we're getting close to the top of the hour. I think, unless I'm mistaken, we've covered all the questions that we have.
Yeah, I think so. I think we've covered everything. As always, if a question comes up after the webinar that you think of later, feel free to reach out to us. You will be getting an email later this afternoon with a link to the replay. You can always reply to that and get your questions asked there, and we'll be sure that they get in front of Greg and Patrick to answer. But that's really everything we had. We did mention the survey. So as soon as we end here in just a moment, it's going to pop up. Just 2 quick questions. Again, we'd really love to get your feedback on the webinar today. So we'd appreciate that. And with that, just be on the lookout for the email later today with the replay link. And we certainly appreciate your time. And as always, you can learn more by looking up Cavell Group and checking out their website, as well as ribboncommunications.com with much more information about Operator Connect and all the things to look forward to. Thanks, Greg. Thanks, Patrick. Appreciate your time.
Thanks, Lance.
Thanks, Lance.
Have a good day.